order. Hearing now resumed.
Mr. Commissioner, Ms. Grande McNeil for Canada.
It's Geneva Grandy McNeil, GRANDE hyphen MCNEILL for Canada with Tim Timberg. I just have a short series of questions, mostly for Mr. Tatey, approximately 20 questions, and I'll try to move through them as quickly as possible. Now, Mr. Tatey, you've explained to us what a creel survey is, but what is a creel?
Good morning. A creel, people do ask what a creel survey is, and they have the word creel, and a creel is the wicker basket that anglers would hold their catch in. That classical wicker basket, and our survey is surveying what's inside that basket.
And we've heard a lot of terminology around that, and I'm just wondering if you can explain to us what catch monitoring means.
And that is another term. Sometimes catch monitoring, fisheries monitoring, the projects that we conduct and my program conducts on recreational catch monitoring, they can get a little confusing, and I think people do sometimes misunderstand, the public misunderstand what the projects we conduct are trying to do out there. And words like monitoring sometimes give a flavor of supervision. They sometimes give the idea that we are out there making judgment with consequences about their activities. And that's not the case. We are a survey. Catch monitoring refers to the catch, not the fishery. The monitoring, yes, you could say we are catch monitoring. We're determining what is caught in the fishery. But certainly when it comes to our creel survey, and this is one of the reasons why I use that term more than any term that has the word monitoring in it, we're out there just surveying. It's a voluntary survey that we conduct without fear of repercussion. And so we do try to keep an independence, a distance from the enforcement end of it. Our creel surveys are as well, it's difficult, the public sometimes find it very difficult to make that distinction between they see a DFO representative out there asking them questions. We try very hard to provide anglers with information on where they can go. The Observe, Record, Report, I think, was highlighted yesterday in the fishing guide. We provide them that information so they can report any sort of step back, actually, to make it clear. We get approached by anglers that think we are enforcement out there. Should have made that clear. And we do not have that enforcement capability or mandate whatsoever. So we do provide them with information, though, on where they can go to report anything they see. And sometimes anglers have a hard time with that. They see a DFO representative and they think that we should be able to not only survey but also be enforcement, but certainly that's not part of our function.
All right, and now how does catch monitoring relate to stock assessment? Because I understand you are part of stock assessment at DFO.
Yes, so I am part of stock assessment. I'm not part of fish management. I'd be part of science branch. It relates, stock assessment, maybe say it's, in order to make informed decisions, fishery management decisions, stock assessment plays a huge role in that. It's the backbone of many of the things we do. And certainly catch is part of that. Stock assessment information we provide. Escapement would be another piece. You need the complete picture in order to make an informed decision. And that's why it is important, and that's the link.
Okay. And what term do you use to describe what you do?
The term would be we survey. We conduct an organized study, an organized survey on the recreational fishery. In this example, we're using the Fraser main stem to provide accurate information for fish managers to respond to.
And we've heard evidence already that Fraser sockeye are caught by recreational fishers in tidal and non-tidal waters. And can you explain to us who at DFO is performing catch monitoring of the recreational fishery in tidal waters?
In tidal waters, in the catch monitoring in the Strait of Georgia, southern BC, catch monitoring is stock assessment. Is assessing that in the marine areas. In the tidal waters of the Fraser River, that would be that would be myself as well.
All right, and then in freshwater, who at DFO is conducting catch monitoring?
In freshwater in the Fraser, there's two groups. Our group does it. My group does it in the freshwater Fraser up to Sawmill Creek. And then I think it was indicated yesterday as well that in the BC Interior has the administrative jurisdiction over above Sawmill Creek, and that is Resource Management that actually conducts the recreational surveys in that area.
All right. So you've mentioned that you are conducting creel surveys as part of science. Who do you report to?
Myself, I report to Timber Whitehouse.
And who is he?
Timber is the area chief for Fraser Stock Assessment. His office is up in the BC Interior office.
And we've previously heard some evidence about science's role in the provision of advice to fisheries managers. Can you explain your role as advice provider to fisheries managers in the context of your work on the creel survey?
Besides the results of our studies, which is probably the primary concern of the managers like Deb here, they want to know how much has been caught and released by certain time periods and so on. We provide that. They may want to peel back a couple layers and see a little bit of the dynamic and the characteristic of the fishery as well, to gain some insight into what's occurring out there. Some of the advice, might be related to the example in 2009 when the river was, there was a notice, and maybe Deb can speak a little bit better to this, but she was looking for information on a component of our survey, our overflights, where we, at a particular time of the day, survey the entire study area. And we can make a distinction between the type of gear, the type of method that the angler is using. And back in 2009, Fish Management had requested that anglers use a more selective methods in fishing for sockeye. Deb wanted to see some of our in-season information on that, whether or not the anglers were responding to that request on that fisher's notice and the like. So that's one example.
And on that example, Mr. Lund, maybe we could have number 30 from the missions list. This document, Mr. Tatey?
Yes, I do.
And what is this?
This is an email to Timber, my supervisor, that updated an email that was sent earlier from one of the biologists in my program. And it's the example I was referring to where we were looking at the technique used by the recreational community in our study area through time. And that we were making the distinction between two types. One was a bar fishing method, and the other was the bottom bouncing method.
And those are the two fishing methods that were discussed yesterday.
That's correct.
Okay. And Mr. Lund, maybe we can just scroll down a bit. And so this is, I understand, the attachment to that email, and what is this telling us?
Yeah, so this is really busy, and you collect a lot of data, and there's lots of different ways to look at the information, and some of it's intuitive, some of it's not. So really what this is showing, there's three figures here, and they all are with the same information, just displayed slightly differently. One may work better for you. But what it was trying to show was, and maybe we'll go to figure 2, which is the line one. It's one more up there. Figure 2, the one to the right there with the colored, the orange and yellow and black. What that was showing was the technique used in 2 different sections of the Fraser River through time.
And by technique, you're referring to the two fishing
Right.
methods, is that right?
A bar setup and a bottom bouncing setup. So what we have is we have date along the bottom axis, and we have percent of the anglers that we counted that were fishing that technique. And it's fairly stable up until about August 11th. And what you see there is, and that's when the fishery notice went out by fish managers for people to be fishing selectively. What you notice is a drop in the bottom bouncing technique, in percentage-wise over the total, and you also notice an increase, so a reciprocal increase in the bar fishing technique. But they're both fishing at about 50% there at around the 11th, 40 to 60%, right around there. Then what you show, I think the regulation was a change. There was a change in the regulation where you could not fish in Section 2. And what you'll see.
What's Section 2?
Oh yeah, sorry. When we do our study, we break the Lower Fraser up into two sections. One is from Mission Bridge upstream to Rosedale Bridge, and the other is from Rosedale Bridge up to the mouth of the Coquihalla in this particular year.
All right, and maybe I'll just ask Ms. Adams and Ms. Snedden, in looking at this information, were there any management decisions taken as a result of this?
Yes, so on August 11th, we sent out a fishery notice asking folks that are going to continue to fishing for Chinook, because we closed the fishing for sockeye. We said no fishing for sockeye. If you want to fish for Chinook, we would prefer you to fish with a more selective method like bar fishing. There was a list on the fishery notice of the types of methods we would like to see. So that was August 11th. And between August 11th and August 18th, there was a definite shift in the fishing behavior, mainly in the lower section that Joe mentioned, Section 1, which went from the Mission Bridge to the Agassiz-Rosedale Bridge. Not so much of a change in the area above that. And so on August 18th, we closed the river from Agassiz-Rosedale Bridge to the Hope Bridge to fishing for salmon.
All right, thanks very much.
And actually, maybe I'll just add to that too, because this is a busy figure, and I think the one now that I look at this, and again, is the one that the key in on is the black line, the black circle line up top, and the square circle line below, line below. The top one with this black circles, that's the bottom bouncing in the top section that Deb referred to. And you can see prior to the 11th of August, that section was pretty much predominated. The technique was bottom bouncing. It's up near 100%. On August 11th, it dipped down to about the 80%, but it was still the predominant fishing method in that section, and even at the request of fishing selectively.
Okay. And Mr. Registrar, can this be marked as the next exhibit?
That'll be marked as exhibit number, the document will be marked as exhibit number 538. The attached spreadsheet is 538A.
All right, and Mr.
I may be wrong on this. I understood that this document may have been marked yesterday in the course of my entering it through this witness. All right, I'm wrong. Thank you.
Mr. Lunn, if we can have number 4 from Canada's stock assessment list. So, Mr. Tatey, you've described for us some of your in-season advice to managers, and you described a little bit yesterday some of your annual reporting. And do you recognize this document?
Yes.
And what is it?
It's actually a document. It's actually our web page. It's our internet web page available to anybody, where we post our results from our studies. It goes back to 2001 here on the yearly studies, and it's up to present to 2010. Actually have some results from our 2010 already there. On the top part there are historical summaries. There's 3 highlighted blue. We have 1999 Lower Fraser River Coho Catch and Release Study. That was mentioned yesterday by Devona, I believe. And then there's some historical tables showing Chilliwack River and Fraser River historical summaries of effort and catch from 1984 to present.
And this is available to the public.
Yes.
And can that be marked as the next exhibit?
And I should add, this is where we will post not only our in-season estimates, but our postseason estimates, which is what this page is showing.
And outside of these annual reports, what are some examples of annual processes where your Creel data is used?
Some examples would be PSC, the Pacific Salmon Commission, their postseason report on treaty limited fisheries. Our catch information would go into that. There's a domestic Southern BC regional postseason report. Our information would go into that. Our catch information is fed into Chinook information document, Fraser River Chinook information document that's produced on an annual basis. Our information as well is rolled up in presentations that are provided to the Sportfish Advisory Board. I think it's November, December, no, Devona may know the meeting. I'm not sure if it's December that the meeting is at. So our results would be rolled up into those presentations. Pretty much anywhere, anything that's people are looking for information on Fraser recreational fishery catch information.
Okay. Now I just want to ask you some questions about the methodology and criticisms around the methodology. Mr. Frank Kwok's witness summary, and I'll read you a paragraph from that summary. I don't think we need to go to the document. He states that he will express some concern that Creel survey data, especially in respect of caught and released fish, may be inaccurate due to over-reporting and misidentification by fishers, noting that most fishers cannot tell the difference between a Chinook and a sockeye when the fish are still in the water. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I guess there'd be a couple things there. The over-reporting part, certainly when it comes to harvest and when it comes to release, as we touched on yesterday, the harvest component of it, there is a verification process for that. So, we survey a number of anglers. The Fraser, there could be this past year, and in years when there's a sockeye opening, it could be approaching or over 10,000 interviews we conduct. Of the people that said they've harvested fish in those interviews, it's 75 to 95% of the people will allow us to inspect their catch. And as indicated yesterday, there's not much, I have not ever seen someone over-report or under-report their catch on that verification. So I think there's a case where you could argue that we get a taste of that sort of over or under reporting on the harvest number. On the release number, no, that is problematic. There's nothing to verify. You are going by angler recall, and certainly angler recall, and I can speak from personal experience, it's difficult sometimes, and there are certain situations where the recall, it's going to be problematic. I know myself personally, if I'm fishing for a long time and I get up around the 6 or 7 or 8 fish number, I tend to wonder what I have caught, unless I'm recording it. And some anglers do record. Certainly if you're out there fishing for just an hour and a half and you only caught 1 fish, you're going to remember that. You're not going to forget that 1 fish. Or if you've caught 0, you're not going to forget that you didn't have a fish. I find that hard to believe. So his comment his comment is a valid one when it comes to the release numbers. There could be problems with recall. I think one of the things with the comment, he assumes that it's an overestimate. I would argue that it could easily be an underestimate as well.
All right, now.
And sorry, then the second part of that was species identification.
Yes.
So again, on that one, the harvest, we do have the ability to get a flavor of whether or not people are making mistakes out there in species ID. And I think, as I indicated earlier today, it does happen. We do have sockeye harvest and people think they're coho. We have chum harvest and they think they're Chinook. It is very rare. It is very rare that I've seen in the most recent data where people make species ID, and there is a way where we do have the ability to test it, to test people's ability for species ID in the harvest number. When it comes to the release number, again, it's slightly problematic. However, in order for an angler to make the determination of whether or not he's going to keep it or not, he does have to know the species. So I would think that if there is a greater mis-ID error when it comes to the release numbers, or if there is a problem with ID error when it comes to the release numbers, I would think we would get some taste of that in the harvest numbers. You know, so if people are really prone to making species ID error in the release numbers, you would think that would spill over absolutely to a degree in the harvest numbers. And like I say, it's rare that we do get it. It does happen, but it is rare compared to the whole number of surveys we do on harvest. It's small.
Thank you. And Mr. Kwok also suggests that the catch per unit effort numbers from the data collected in the mortality study, which was discussed yesterday, could be used to check the accuracy of the creel surveys. And do you have a comment on that?
First off, it's a survey and a sample as well. So there are other people fishing a grassy bar, and it's a survey and sample of that area. Secondly, I would think on the grassy bar study, I don't have the demographics, but it's something you would have to check out. Arguably, that's a study that a lot of the more avid anglers would be interested in, and it might attract a more experienced angler to that study. Our fishery is made up of not only experienced anglers, but it's also made up of a lot of inexperienced anglers. And you certainly don't want to bias. I would want to take a look at, I would possibly think that could be a bias sample for more of the experienced anglers, which would have arguably a higher catch rate. So that to me would be one area that would not make it necessarily a valid comparison. The other is that, you know, Grassy Bar is only one angling site in the entire Fraser, and there are many, many angling sites. Comparing Grassy Bar to comparing Grassy Bar and the catch that's done at Grassy Bar and extrapolating that to the total fishery wouldn't be appropriate in my idea. And so a comparison there again wouldn't necessarily be valid.
Okay. And you've mentioned to us that you have a high participation rate in your survey, and why you inspect the catch of anglers that you do survey. Do anglers generally allow you to inspect their catch?
So, oh yes. I mean, you know, 75 to 95% of the anglers will allow us, that say they've harvested something, will allow us to inspect their catch.
Okay. Now, you've also described for us issues around accuracy, precision, and confidence intervals. And how does a confidence interval relate to precision?
The confidence interval, how it relates to precision. The confidence interval is a measure of how tight. Confidence interval is a measure of the variation around your estimate or result. If your confidence interval is, and that's where you generally with a confidence interval you'll see a plus or minus. It'll be plus or minus 5%, plus or minus 10%. So the confidence interval is that range, and the more precise you are, the smaller that range will be. So you'll see plus or minus 5%. That confidence interval is less, and it's tighter, it's more precise than something that would be plus or minus 15%.
And do you generate confidence intervals for your creel estimates?
The answer to that would be a yes and no. The old DPA software did generate confidence intervals. The new CREST software we're developing will generate confidence intervals. Currently, we're working in an Excel for 2008, 9, and 10, these last 3 years, while we've been waiting for the development of CREST. We have not we have not generated confidence intervals. They could be generated, and they will be generated once CREST is fully developed. Our information will be in CREST, and we will generate final estimates that will have confidence intervals. And that's one of the reasons why currently the estimates from 2008, 9, and 10, because they're being done in an Excel version, they're only preliminary. They're not final yet. But at that time, when they are final, confidence intervals will be generated, yes.
Current methodology used address issues of precision.
The current methodology, precision is really related to, in order to get a more precise result, it can be really driven by sample size. So the more samples you get, the tighter your precision is going to be. It's really driven by sample size. And so we have, there's a value associated with our project. We have so many dollars to spend on our project. We hire so many people, and they conduct as many interviews as they can, making sure that we are not in any way biasing the accuracy, making sure that our accuracy is there. So we do not want to necessarily go to just the high traffic areas, because that could be biasing a result. We do as well have to go to areas that are of low effort to get a taste of what's occurring in those areas as well, because the fishery is dynamic over a large area. So, how our survey addresses precision, in some ways the precision it ends up to be what it is. The primary goal of us for our program would be the accuracy and making sure that our study design is sound, and then the precision will follow.
And you've described how your Creel methodology uses both for estimates. Is that a common approach to Creel surveys?
In the Pacific region, yes. And Deb touched on that yesterday. The study design that we use that uses, and there was a third piece would be sort of an activity profile. Those three components, an interview, an activity profile, and some sort of instantaneous effort count. That study design is used throughout the Pacific region.
Sorry, what's an activity profile?
Oh, the activity profile, I went through that with Brock yesterday, and that's where at certain locations along the river, we conduct what we call an hourly rod count. So we have a surveyor that will survey, if you start at 7 in the morning, how many rods are fishing, and then how many rods are fishing at 8, and then 9 and 10, all the way through his shift. And we will generate what we call an activity profile of the proportion of anglers fishing at each hour of the day.
And what are some other possible approaches to the survey apart from doing the instantaneous rod counts and angler interviews?
I think certainly there are other approaches. One of the ones I think, and Devona touched on it yesterday, would be some sort of mail or telephone survey. The one thing that we do with our surveys that's not necessarily unique, because it is used throughout the region, but we have pretty much two independent surveys. We have a survey that people are interviewing, and then we have this independent survey with overflight counts and the hourly rod counts. That's a little bit unique. There have been, it's a hybrid survey, it's a complemented survey. Those are terms used to describe what we do. There are other ways to get complemented surveys, and one could be we could interview at access sites, don't do the overflights, and save money there, and then conduct a telephone interview in season or after the fact. That may reduce costs. It wouldn't necessarily, you'd have to look at whether or not that would increase the accuracy. It might increase the precision, it might not. Telephone interviews, you'd still have problems with recall on release numbers, and so there are other ways to do it. I think one of the things that is good about what we do, that's beneficial to the type of project we run in the Fraser River, is that we're on the ground and we're actually assessing, and it isn't done over the phone. We're on the ground assessing, and that's one of the benefits.
Increase the precision or accuracy of your Creel estimates?
Well, certainly the precision is related to sample size, so certainly more resources to hire more staff to get more interviews, that will increase the precision. That won't necessarily affect the accuracy though. So the accuracy is maintained by, or the accuracy is, our study design is important for the accuracy and maintaining random sample, maintaining stratification to some of the data. Those are some of the things that we do for the accuracy.
And as it relates to Fraser Sockeye, would you expand your sampling geographically?
Or to include areas, certainly, I mean, more money for the projects we conduct to do more, yeah, I wouldn't say no, but we have shown within the Fraser, there are certain areas in the Fraser that probably don't give much juice for the squeeze, for the dollar value it would cost to survey that. And when the example we talked about yesterday was downstream of Mission Bridge, so certainly there is angling occurring downstream of Mission Bridge, but when we have looked, and we looked in 2010, we did this year, and in previous years we looked, we've noted that the effort in those areas is extremely low. And the example yesterday was, 1% of the total for the total area. So yes, we could expand in those areas. I'm not sure if it'd be good bang for the buck. Certainly spatially in other areas, there are some terminal fisheries that on Fraser Sockeye that probably are not assessed to the degree they could be. So terminally may be a way to go.
Okay, and also for Fraser Sockeye, would you expand your sampling temporally?
For Fraser Sockeye, again, in the Fraser main stem, I think we're pretty good there. So, my quick answer would be no. I think we capture the Fraser Sockeye in the Fraser main stem. But an example would be the Chilliwack River fishery that does encounter cultus sockeye. The focus of that survey is Chinook, and we get there in mid-September, and there are people angling in that river prior to mid-September that would be encountering sockeye, and with a Fraser Sockeye focus, sure, that would be an area that would be nice to be able to get in there a little bit earlier and address some of the sockeye concerns.
Okay. Now you've already touched on this, but wanted to give you a further opportunity to tell us what changes, if any, you would make to the current Creel survey as it relates to Fraser Sockeye.
One of the challenges we've had with the increase in this sockeye fishery over the last while, and the turn-on, turn-off nature of the fishing, there's this huge pulse that we get of recreational anglers when there's all of a sudden a sockeye retention fishery in the Fraser. We've been fortunate in the last couple of years to access PICFI money, and I don't quite know what the acronym stands for, PICFI, Pacific Integrated Fisheries, Commercial Fisheries Initiative, where we've gotten additional money to supplement our core assessment to hire additional staff during the sockeye retention period. That's something that PICFI is sunset, and I'm not sure where we will be able to get those resources to hire those additional staff during that really busy time. So something that would on the Fraser Sockeye focus, that would certainly be an improvement to solidify and secure funding for that increase, that from a Fraser Sockeye perspective.
And anything else? It's possible you touched on these yesterday, so I just wanted to give you an opportunity to expand.
I might have. I'm drawing a blank right now.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the other tools for catch accounting we're looking at are, as I mentioned yesterday, using subsamples of licensing systems to do that via the internet. We've spoken to colleagues in Washington State and looked at the options of having mail surveys or using enhanced mail surveys or phone surveys. And the reports we've got back from colleagues in Washington State and other jurisdictions across Canada is that the public in general has a lowering appetite towards phone surveys and mail surveys, and we're seeing an increase in people wanting to use the internet to provide information. So I think that's really an area that we need to develop and look at to augment, like as Joe says, the folks that are on the ground seeing things firsthand, but it would be good to do some comparative work or some additional work to add on through electronic means.
And I have one more. When we touched on this, is angler recall on releases numbers. Certainly we could do observational studies, something dedicated to the Fraser and the sockeye retention fishery at certain times. Observational studies on angler recall that we could then look at and compare to what we're seeing at the interview for release estimates, and something independent that we can assess and compare to see if there are any differences there.
And what do you mean by differences?
Differences in the release rates between the two samples.
So sorry, if I'm understanding you, you would compare the observational studies, what that's telling you?
Yeah,
about
and maybe
what's being released compared to what the anglers are telling you.
Thanks, Geneva. Yeah, I guess when I said observational studies, I guess I assumed you knew what I meant. So the idea would be that there'd be an independent study going on concurrently to our regular assessment, where we would have people out there just observing anglers and seeing what they're doing. They wouldn't be interviewing them. They'd just be observing them and recording what they see. So they'd be looking at how many fish they had on, how many fish they actively released, and that sort of thing. And then we can do that's an independent sample that we can compare to the sample we're getting on interviews. You know, that may provide insight into if there's anything there. It may also help manage in the future. It'll certainly answer some questions that people like Frank Kwok have on recall. So, you know, that's an area that certainly could be looked at.
Those are my questions.
Mr. Commissioner, I have Mr. Tyzik next on the list.
For the record, Boris Tyzik for the province of British Columbia. I just have a couple of questions for the panel, and the first one I would direct to Ms. Adams, and it was my notes indicate when you had the discussion about user fees and the potential of an increase in fees, you said that there was a group that was looking at possible ways to get more funds to programs, including maybe making an application under the User Fees Act. Do you have any sort of a time frame for that?
I don't have a specific time frame. I know that a colleague of mine, there wasn't a group of us, there was just myself and a colleague here in Fisheries Management and Pacific that have been in discussion with some colleagues in Ottawa around what's required in terms of putting a package forward to the User Fee Act process. So we're really in our exploratory stage, but I think there is a sense of urgency to try and get additional funds to support catch monitoring, possibly salmon enhancement. That's been something that the recreational fishing community has been wanting to provide additional funding towards, and also the Sport Fishing Advisory Board process.
You also made the passing comment, and I don't know if it was more out of frustration or not, but you indicated that if you wanted to get a change to the regulations, it could take up to 3 years.
I think it is a frustration that's shared certainly by government staff that are on the front line, and it's also a frustration that the recreational fishing community has. The Circle Hook sample program that we did in the Fraser in the late 1990s and early 2000, I mean, that's 10 years ago, and for various reasons, the proposal for a regulatory change has been stalled, and it has been a frustrating situation for members of the recreational fishing community as well as federal government staff.
All right, and I just want to follow up on this, because if we're looking at recommendations that may come from this commission, is 3 years sort of a normal response time for the government to reply to suggestions like this? Is it longer, is it shorter, or because that would be of some concern?
My understanding, and I'm not certainly the person that takes these forward to our regulations group in Ottawa, but my understanding from my colleagues is 3 years is a good time frame. Like,
Correct.
That's the best. There certainly have been exceptions to that with emergency regulatory proposals. They go in less time than 3 years, but 3 years is about the average. Sometimes it takes longer.
Thank you. Just a couple more. I've heard from the testimony you made references to selective fishing techniques. Would you consider that the recreational fishery as a whole is, and maybe in specific regard to Fraser River sockeye, is able to fish in an acceptably selective manner?
Well, I guess it depends on what area you're looking at. And whether or not sockeye is open for retention. So in the marine waters, you would be fishing for sockeye with a trolling gear, with usually a bare hook. The fish actively bites it and can be released if it's not a sockeye and if it's not open for that other species. So I would say that that is very selective. If you're fishing in the Fraser River, whether it's tidal or non-tidal, with the poor water quality conditions, a hook and line using a bottom bouncing gear is not as selective. It is selective in that it's a hook and a line, and it's minimal damage. It's hooked on the outside of the mouth, but it's not doesn't meet the first criteria for selective fishing, which is to avoid non-target species, because it's an indiscriminate method similar to a trawl gear or a seine gear. It is not as selective as in the marine waters.
Not as
selective.
Selective, but given the evidence we heard, there's still the ability to release those fish, and we talked about the mortality rates yesterday.
Yes, that's correct. There is the ability to release them, and to release them with minimal mortality rates according to the 3 years of the study that we've conducted so far.
Thank you. And just one question for Mr. Taddy. Could you see the recreational fisheries sector as taking a greater role in improving the quality and quantity of catch monitoring data?
I think they have a huge role in it already. And without their involvement, we don't get the information to do anything. We interview 10,000 anglers on the Fraser main stem this past year, and that to me that's a huge involvement already in the recreational fishery. So improving it. I think by continuing to participate, by continuing to be open to participate, and I think that's probably where I'd go with that. I'm not sure if that gets at what you're asking there.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Those are my questions.
J.K. Lowe's for the BC Wildlife Federation and the BC Federation of Drift Fishers. Morning. I'm going to be asking some questions of Ms. Adams and Ms. Snedden, but from where I sit, I wasn't able to see who gave what evidence. So it should probably be obvious from the questions who I'm directing the question for. I'd like to start out by, could you call up Exhibit 526, please? It's the Decision Guidelines Memorandum for the Regional Director.
I think that's 526A.
That's it. And I missed who was the author of that document. Was it Ms. Snedden?
It was actually in 2006 drafted by a colleague of mine, Linda Stevens, and Devona Adams, but this is the 2009 version as I forwarded up the line to see whether it was still applicable.
Right. And it was authored by someone at the level of you two as I think
Yes,
you
my
said frontline staff managers.
Yeah, my predecessor in this role.
My questions are really a follow-up to some of the questions that the commissioner asked, and they're really focused on the one big question that intrigues me, and perhaps I can give you that question and then maybe use the exhibit as a case study. The big question is this: is how, when, and by whom are high-level general broad policies or concepts articulated as specific fisheries management decisions. And when I say decisions, I mean both fishing plans and in-season changes. And as I was looking at this exhibit 526, it seemed to be a bit of a case study as to that question. So perhaps I can start with this. Ms. Adams, I think you've referred 2 or 3 times to the dearth of regulations. Is it correct that your directions are essentially through policies and policy documents as distinct from regulations.
I wouldn't say they're separate. The acts and the regulations are absolutely critical to the work we do and the development of the integrated fisheries management plan, as well as the sport fishing guide regulations. But we do, underneath that, have policies, and then we have operational decision guidelines, the ones that you referenced here.
Yes, and those policies are to a large extent set out in the kinds of documents that the Commissioner referred to yesterday, vision statements and selective fishing policy and Aboriginal fishing policy and decision-making policy, those kind of documents. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And do those get to people in your at your level, and if so, how do they get to you? How do you get those documents?
Many of the documents have been around for several years, and so I think certainly at my level and Deb's level, we're fishery managers, both regionally and in areas. Those documents we're familiar with those as part of our course of work. In season, we may receive directions through a decision note like the one that you have in front of you. We may also receive some direction on various court case decisions that have come out throughout the season, and we will discuss amongst our staff, our team, both in the areas and region, the interpretation of how we would apply those directives or themes that come from those documents.
Yes. Well, that's what interested me about Exhibit 526. First of all, if I could ask you this, what precipitated that document, 526? Or documents like that?
Right. So initially when it was first written in 2006 by my colleague Linda Stevens, it was around the allocation policy and the guidelines we were looking at with the recreational fishery to provide them with stable and predictable opportunities. And we were trying to come up with some decision guidelines we could use in season or pre-season that we could put in place that would provide that stable and predictable opportunity to the recreational angler.
Yeah, and the thrust of my question was, is that something that your colleague thought would be a good idea, or is that something that your colleague was directed to do by someone else?
I was one of the original authors with Linda Stevens, and it was self-directed. And the reason it was very difficult for us as frontline managers and also for the recreational fishing community to understand what rules or what kind of triggers would be used in a fisheries management decision. And this document was prepared. It was also shared with the recreational fishing community, and it was also shared with the Fraser River panel and anybody else who had an interest in it. It was trying to make some sense of a very high-level policy and how we actually could apply it in our day-to-day management.
Yeah, and that's really the thrust of my questioning, and I'm not, please don't take me as being critical of the document or the process. I just want to open up, if I can, from your perspective, from the perspective of one manager in one department, how they deal with these policies. Now, I take it from looking at 526 that once you decided that it would be a good idea to come up with some guidelines, you looked at a number of things. For one thing, the allocation policy. So was that your decision? Was that your notion of where you would go to find direction on those guidelines?
Well, I think it's safe to say a lot of policy documents are very high level, and then it's up to staff and stakeholders, harvesting groups, to try and interpret or to make it work. And so definitely we took the salmon allocation policy and we said there's a number of principles in here where it talks about the recreational community having predictable and stable opportunities. It talks about the recreational community having a 5% cap on sockeye access, but how do we actually go about doing that throughout the coast in all the different areas where sockeye are being taken in a given year.
Absolutely. And in your thinking process, at some point you realized that one of the concepts that you would have to deal with was the priority to First Nations food, social, and ceremonial fishing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so where did you go, or what did you look at to flesh out the notion of a priority? When is a priority, has a priority been given, and when hasn't it?
Well, that's exactly what that document outlines, is how we will meet our conservation objectives and how we will meet obligations for First Nations FSC fisheries. And then, once those have been taken care of, when would it be realistic to have recreational fisheries in areas where there's a low impact and areas where there's a higher impact or a moderate impact?
No, I understand that, but where did you go to find out what those obligations were?
Could you go to the next page of this presentation, or this exhibit?
Yep.
Okay, so under analysis, I think it's here. No, sorry, under the decision guidelines. So the department's decision-making around First Nation food, social, ceremonial fishery is that in relation to sockeye and the recreational fishery is we want to make sure that First Nations have an opportunity to meet their food, social, ceremonial needs. And in order to provide that opportunity, what we're looking at is in marine waters that they're fishing, that they've already started fishing, and that the recreational fishery in the marine waters is not going to impact their opportunity. In the Lower Fraser area, in the medium to high impact area, we determined that not only do they need to be fishing, they need to be fishing at their full and normal limits, which in a set net fishery was Thursday night at 6 p.m. to Sunday night at 6 p.m. If they were only having limited opportunities, we felt that that wasn't meeting the priority. So we wanted to make sure that they had their full opportunity. It didn't mean that necessarily that they'd caught their FSC needs, but that we were likely to meet their needs.
No, I understand the substance of the document. What I'm focused on really is the process, and what I'm taking from your evidence, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's really you people in your level that are pulling together the notion of a priority, the notion of the allocation, these high-level policy documents, and actually integrating them into a real-life management guidelines. You're distilling them into what's been called in other evidence reference points or decision reference points. Am I correct there? That's the level at which that practical work gets done, is your level.
I think that for the purposes of this document, the rules that we put in here were discussed between Devona as the Regional Recreational Coordinator, Linda Stevens, the Lower Fraser Recreational Manager, in conjunction with other managers in the Lower Fraser office that dealt with First Nation fisheries. Yeah. But from here, it went to that integrated group, the Fraser River Integrated Management Team, that had all levels, including the Canadian chair of the Fraser River panel, who sign off on it. So yes. It's a recommendation from the lower level, yes.
Okay, but the ideas are generated from your office.
For this memo, yes.
Yes, and is this kind of standard? Is this the way that your colleagues in the other departments also work? I mean,
I'm not sure what other departments.
All right. Well, you're talking about the recreational fishery. I was really talking about other fisheries, people that manage other fisheries. Is it essentially colleagues at your level that are really bringing the abstract policies and the general concepts down into nuts and bolts fisheries management decisions?
I mean, you're well aware of the consultation processes that we have. There's no shortage of consultation processes in fisheries and oceans, and many of our fishery managers, like Deb and myself, attend various levels of meetings. So we would be meeting with local First Nations, local recreational harvesters, local commercial harvesters, and we bring issues to them. We discuss the issues that are important to them and important to government, and we make recommendations. So yes, that is a key part of our job as fishery managers, but there's also a decision-making process in our organization at area level, regional level, and nationally.
Yes. Well, I'm interested in the intellectual process that goes into a document like that, and I take it that that's yours. I mean, I'm not criticizing a lack of consultation or that you got too much consultation, but it's your thinking that went into this document.
I would say we're certainly the persons that are threading it all together, but it's I don't know if it's intellectual, but we do it in consultation with the communities, First Nation, recreational, commercial fishing communities that we work with.
Yes. And the input with respect to the law, where did that come from in this particular instance? The reference to the Douglas case.
Sorry, did we reference the Douglas case?
Yes, you referenced it under Con's arguments against possible, the recommendation was that First Nations will not, page 2, under the Cons, the first bullet, First Nations will likely not agree with the recommendations due to the recent Douglas court decision.
Sorry, not seeing that on this document.
Maybe Mr. Lund can help us. It may not be page 2, and I don't have the printed version. It may be the third page.
This is still decision guidelines, is that right?
Sorry, it's page 3. Pros and cons.
Mr. Lund, I'm just reading over Mr. Lowe's shoulder, and it's the, if you can help us to reference if we're on the same ringtail number, CAN 012736. This seems, he may have a different document here. So that's a different document.
Oh, all right. Well, I won't, sorry. I was cross-examining you on a different document, but I think the substance of the questions is really the same. I think the general question that I had, or the point that I was trying to establish, was that the real articulation, if I can put it this way, the practical articulation, at least in this instance, of the allocation policy and the First Nations priority into a recreation fishing guideline was yours.
I think only as written in the document. It is not ours per se, it is the department's policy. I mean, Sparrow decision, the department's management of Aboriginal fishery strategy, we're all well aware of the priority.
Okay. And how are you made aware of the priority, and how do you implement your understanding of the priority into a document such as 526? That's really the thrust of my question. I get the impression, perhaps I can just be very blunt, that it's you who take these big policy ideas and concepts such as priority and the allocation, and put numbers and dates and how you're going to work that into a fishing plan. It's your level of DFO people, in consultation with users and everybody else.
Well, we certainly have input into it, and it goes to a number of different forums, from the individual First Nations groups we interact with to the same for recreational and commercial, and that goes to the integrated harvest planning committees as well, which is a multi-stakeholder group. And there's comments on different perspectives and aspects of this. And Deb mentioned yesterday we did a review of where are we at with this 5% cap with the recreational fishery as a whole, and we met with the commercial fishing community and the recreational fishing community earlier in January this year to see, you know, since 1999 when this policy went into effect to current closure of this year's fishery, where did we actually end up in the big scheme of things? Mm-hmm. So we there's a number of different processes. Yes, we put together some recommendations because we felt we needed some clarity.
Yes, and I think that's really the thrust of my question. That's what generates this kind of on-the-ground practical thinking. Is that fair to say?
We certainly provide recommendations to our senior decision makers. This is a note going up to our Director of Fisheries Management. We have ones that go to the Regional Director General, to the Fisheries Minister, to the Deputy Minister. I mean, we have a chain of command and authorization. So we're putting forward what we think are reasonable suggestions for interpreting a policy, and that's based on consultation with the different stakeholder groups as well as staff that are on the front line.
All right, thank you. You mentioned that you described the Fraser River sockeye non-tidal fishery as medium to high impact. I take it that the word impact refers to the size of the ultimate catch. Catches a lot of fish, or catches medium to high amount of fish.
It's a combination of the number of anglers that can be out there in a given day and the resulting catch, because you can have a number of anglers out there in a given day and not necessarily have a lot of catch because not many fish are going through. But if there's a big pulse of fish, the catch could be significant.
Yeah.
So.
And it's so that virtually all of the fisheries, certainly in the lower Fraser River sockeye fisheries, are moderate to high impact.
In the non-tidal waters of the Fraser River, particularly between Mission and Hope, that is the area we would consider medium to high impact.
Yes. Well, I wasn't talking about just the recreational fishery. I'm saying the fisheries generally for sockeye in the Fraser River are medium to high impact. Commercial, Aboriginal.
I think there's a range. I mean, it depends on whether you're looking at by an individual First Nation or whether you're looking at the entire one. And they could be high, they could be low. They could be low if you have a limited opportunity, like say 4 hours. So it depends on the decision you make when you're open that fishery.
You can catch fish faster with a net than with a hook and line?
Well, depends on the time of year. If we're talking sockeye and there's an abundance of sockeye in the river, then yes.
Assuming the same amount of fish.
Yep. Yeah.
The recreational fishing community is an extremely large one.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And would you agree with me that given its size, it's relatively speaking pretty well organized in terms of its ability to communicate with the managers?
The recreational fishing community, I think, through the Sport Fishing Advisory Board is very well represented. We have been criticized, and it's certainly legitimate criticism, that we often do not have the views of independent anglers that aren't part of an organization like the Wildlife Federation or the Federation of Drift Fishers or other large organizations. And part of that, I think, certainly is a challenge that we need to address, but fishermen by nature sometimes don't want to belong to any organization. They're independent people. So we have to try and find a balance as to what's our responsibility to communicate and inform independent anglers versus those who don't want to belong.
Yeah. And I noticed that each one of you referred to both Mr. Otway and I can't remember his name, the writer of the letter from the lodge owner, by their first names. I take it there's a pretty good communication between the representatives of the recreational fishery and the department?
Yes, I would say that over the years, I think in one of the presentations or one of the witness summaries, it talks about the long-standing volunteerism of the recreational community, and so they've been around generally a lot longer than us and very familiar with fisheries, so we've learned a lot from them and we've developed very good relationships for the most part with most of them, and yes, we're on fairly friendly terms as well.
And I would just like to add that that's not just with the recreational fishing community. We also are on first name basis with many First Nations and commercial fishers as well, and conservation groups. And At times, it seems like our relationship is that of a family. We attend one another's funerals and weddings, and we do have a very strong relationship with the people that we interact with.
Yes, and in fact, many departmental people attended the late Mr. Otway's memorial. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And there was even a color guard of uniformed fisheries officers.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, a great deal of respect for him.
Yes, very much.
The management changes that you suggested, and I'm talking about this circle hook and the length of leader on the bottom bouncing gear and that sort of stuff. That's essentially to provide you with the ability to do a little more fine tuning and not just have to hit the on and off switch. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yes, that is correct. So right now, if you want to limit opportunity on sockeye, but you want to still allow that opportunity for anglers to fish for Chinook in the Fraser River when they're more abundant, we don't have that opportunity right now.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Mr. Commissioner, this may be a good opportunity for the break.
Mr. Commissioner, I don't want to leave a confusion on the record, so what I will do is try to track down what the document that I was referring to was, and perhaps have that document marked through my learned friends, the Commission Council, at some point, so that we don't have a mess. Thank you.
Hearing will now recess for 15 minutes.